New Year's Special Part 1. Woo, yeah, let's go. Hello. Happy New Year. Having witnessed a whole year of chaos and who knows what else, I think we can all say with confidence that 2022 was truly the year of all time. Despite the fact that we've all witnessed what is quite possibly the end of the world as we know it, there were some great moments at the Cup of Chamomile household. I started my YouTube channel, finally, and got to spread books and memes on Earth. This was also my best reading year so far. Yay! This wasn't just my best reading year on the numbers front, but I also enjoyed a great majority of the books I read, the majority of them being above a 3.5 out of 5. There were some flops this year, of course, but we don't talk about those. And I'm not here to talk about the flops anyway. I'm here to talk about the best books I read this year. And maybe if I pretend everything is fine, then 2023 will be a good year. I'll try and keep my thoughts brief, because there's a lot of books that I'm going to cover in this video. But first I want to start with some honorable mentions. Some of these are in the top 10 for sure, but didn't quite make the top 5. And there were a lot of decisions I had to make. The cutoff for any of my reads to make this list was December 29th, which was yesterday at the time of filming this video. And at the time of filming this video, there's less than 35 hours to the new year. Oh god. There were a lot of factors that went into making this list, including overall score and enjoyment, and impact on me personally as well. So yeah, enough rambling, let's get on to the honorable mentions. First up on the honorable mentions is Volume 1 of Chainsaw Man. It's about men with chainsaw heads. You'll love to see it. The main character Denji is ridiculously in debt and hunts down monsters called devils alongside his totally normal dog to get by. When he's betrayed, he makes a deal with his, again, totally normal dog to become the titular Chainsaw Man. This opens up a whole new window of opportunity, but as we learn very early on, Denji is a simple man with simple needs. If you know, you know. This was a very wild read. Utterly hilarious at times, pretty raunchy in regards to the humor, and there's a few other things at that, so might not be for everyone. However, we must appreciate the simple goals of the main character in a world of fiction where some may seek out to be the very best at whatever it is they wish to accomplish, or seek power or whatever. As I've said before, his goals are much simpler than that. Next up on the honorable mentions is the first volume of Moriarty the Patriot. Is this canon to the Sherlock Holmes lore? Probably not. Did that affect my enjoyment of the series? Also no. For those of you who don't know, this is the supposed origin story of Professor James Moriarty, the arch-nemesis to a certain fellow named Sherlock Holmes. You might have heard of him. Do you enjoy snobbish rich people and others who look down on the less fortunate getting a good hot dose of karma? Do you enjoy the aforementioned snobbish and arrogant rich people getting stepped on in more ways than one? If so, you found the right series. There are no numbers here on this list, but this barely missed the top 5. So if I were to give numbers to this list, I would probably put this at number 7. Next up is The Witches of New York by Amy McKay. This historical fantasy about witches in the 19th century in New York, while not in the top 5, is still worth mentioning. It's got almost everything that makes my heart do somersaults of joy. Paranormal stuff, tea, 19th century vibes. There's also this really fascinating allegory with women and magic and standing up for themselves and living their own lives in a time where that wasn't exactly a thing. It's 1880, is anybody surprised? I also want to talk about the juxtaposition between the main characters and the villains, who are a group of self-righteous, power-hungry fiends who think they're doing something right in subjugating women and condemning those who think differently from them and trying to get people on the so-called straight and narrow because their god told them to. There's so much that I want to say about this, but a lot of it goes into spoiler territory. However, I will say that sometimes the people who harm others and call them sinners purely for existing and for the way they're born and think they're doing the right thing in doing so, may be in for a very interesting surprise. Next up is Volume 1 of Spy Family. This is a rather wholesome manga about a spy who has to infiltrate an elite school with the help of an assassin and a telepathic child. However, the spy has no idea his fake wife is an assassin, and the only one who knows what's up is his fake child. As someone who gravitates towards darker stuff, this was a breath of fresh air. I also plan on watching the anime adaptation soon, but that's if my brain will let me. Next up is Volume 1 of the case study of Vanitas. Vampires? Vampires. I am very much enjoying the series so far about a man who crosses paths with a vampire doctor in an alternate 19th century Paris. The artwork, the aesthetic, but seriously, I am also enjoying the characters and the premise and the story, and also Vanitas is a menace. Next up on the honorable mentions is Blood Scion by Deborah Falaye. This first book in a fantasy duology follows the main character Sloane, who has to hide her magic from the ruling class or risk getting yeeted. However, that's easier said than done when she gets conscripted into their army on her 15th birthday. This gives her the opportunity to investigate the truth of her mother's disappearance, but she also runs the risk of becoming the very thing she hates. This was a delicious and very compelling read at that. I did enjoy reading the story from Sloane's perspective. No shortage of violence, though, for anyone who may need that heads up anyway. I have to say, though, I was not expecting those plot twists. No spoilers, of course, but I just have this to say. Imagine hating yourself that much. And always remember, colonialism is cringe. Rounding out the honorable mentions is Volume 3 of Mars Red. More vampires, you say? Don't mind if I do. This is the last volume of a 3-volume manga series set in Japan in 1923, and follows a specially formed unit within the army created to counter the rising threat of vampires. As they carry out their mission, however, they come across strange phenomena and individuals that make them question their purpose and maybe reconsider their life choices. The characters were probably the best part about this series, along with their reactions to the circumstances around them. Maybe the biggest crime is the fact of its short length, but hey, at least I finished something, so that's gotta count for something, right? Right? Okay, so those were all the honorable mentions. Without further ado, here is the top 5 for this year. Well, okay, it's actually the top 6, but shh, you are nothing. Anyway, cue the dramatic effects.
The Pious Men. That was a name I hadn't heard since before the war. That was what we had called ourselves when we were up-and-coming young men, Yakin and me. I couldn't remember now which one of us had first thought of it. But when your family name is Piety, you might as well make something of it. I'd never thought to become a priest as well, but it completed the picture nicely.
I'm trying to figure out what to say here that hasn't already been said in my review for Priest of Bones, which was also one of the first videos I put up on this channel. Former conman, currently army priest Thomas Piety, returns home after a brutal war with his surviving men at his side. However, when he returns to the city of Ellenburg, he discovers that it's in a worse state than when he left it, and all of his businesses are filled with random strangers that he's never met in his life. With the help of his crew, the Pious Men, Thomas sets out to take back everything that was his. Until the governor decides to start breathing down his neck. So, just a normal Wednesday morning, I guess. While Priest of Bones is a very plot-driven story, there's almost no filler, and the characters never feel like cardboard cutouts. Bonus points for the very distinctive voice of the main character, Thomas. I believe this would be high fantasy by merit of the story taking place in a world that isn't ours, in other words, it's not Earth. But there are a lot of aspects of the world, both in Ellenburg and the snippets we hear of the outside world, that make it feel very similar to Earth. But as I said in my book review, I'm not sure if I would ever set foot in Ellenburg, because I'd like my nightmares to not be scary. I also touched on this in my book review, but this is a very dark read and covers a lot of stuff, including but absolutely not limited to violence. If you want to know more, the link to the review is in the description.
No, he said quietly. No more, Alaris. No more trying to sow doubt. No more dredging up arguments that we have already had, or distracting me with questions to which I gave you my answers centuries ago. Shame on you for that. Shame on you for trying to take advantage of my ignorance. He stared at the other man steadily, letting him see how heartfelt was his own disappointment. The fact is, I know what I believe now. I remember why all of this is necessary.
It's a miracle I've never dropped this, honestly. This is the final book in the Lycanius trilogy, a high fantasy trilogy set 20 years after a rebellion that led to a series of heavy restrictions on people known as the Gifted. The magic system is a lot more elaborate than that, as the reader soon learns, and there's also a lot more to the history of the world than the rebellion that overthrew these prophet-like beings called augurs, who once used their abilities to see into the future. There's a lot of existential stuff in here, and other things to think about also. One of these is how light and darkness and good and evil aren't exactly clear-cut, and whether it is possible to attain redemption after committing some unspeakable acts, as illustrated in the story arc of one of the main characters. All 3 books in the series are big boys, but as I have said, there is a lot of lore surrounding the history of the world, and to condense it would be, I imagine, impossible. But safe to say, the Lycanius trilogy has cemented itself in the pantheon of my all-time favorite books, and I do have my eyes on The Will of the Many. It's not set in the world of the Lycanius trilogy to my knowledge, but it is written by the same author, and I will also discuss it in my 2023 releases video.
Secrets. How heavy they are, older sister had once told me as she'd run her hand across her scalp, pulling free a fistful of hair. They have ruined me. I had once tried to pry these secrets out from my sister's husband. Was my sister a criminal? A runaway adulteress? But he had replied, "She's trying to protect you from whatever is hiding in her past." Something made her scared.
I've talked about this book several times already in the last few weeks, but as I have said, I greatly enjoyed this book. As a matter of fact, all of the books in my top 6, save for one, are 5-star reads. This is a historical mystery set in 1800 in present-day Seoul, and follows a girl who takes it upon herself to solve the murder of a noblewoman. However, there is a lot more going on beneath the surface, though I guess this is par for the course with mysteries, and the inspector she's been tasked to work with has become the prime suspect. The reason my top 6 is my top 6 is because this book is tied with Priest of Bones. For what position? That's a secret. Probably. No bones were involved in the making of this decision. There was a lot about this book that fascinated me, including the intersections between the concepts of honor and hierarchy and obedience, as well as the growing presence of Catholicism in the region, which was being persecuted at the time. There's also the stories of more severe Catholic persecution to come in the backdrop of the story, but there is a reason that it's there. A lot of the characters are also carrying something that they've chosen to hide away, whether out of shame or otherwise, and just about all of them are hiding something. So there is another fascinating theme to look at, that being, you never know what someone might be hiding.
People don't always send messages in order to communicate the truth, Mr. Okada, she said. The voice was no longer Kumiko's. Neither was it the original girlish voice. This was a new voice, which belonged to someone else. It had a poised, intelligent ring to it. Just as people don't always meet others in order to reveal their true selves. Do you grasp my meaning, Mr. Okada?
If you put 2 people in a room, is it truly possible for them to understand each other both inside and out? This is one of the primary existential questions posed in this surrealist fiction novel about a man down on his luck who has to search for his cat and also his wife, who happens to be hiding away some dark secrets of her own. Along the way, he encounters a number of eccentric individuals, all of whom introduce us to the dark depths of their past. And he also encounters a strange parallel world that serves as part of a supernatural element that ultimately plays a big part of the story. It is a bit easy to get lost in the story, especially if you don't pay close attention, but I do appreciate that this is one of those books that makes you think, and I also appreciated lots of the little things being connected to each other in the story as well. Now, if anyone has happened to read Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, please let me know your thoughts, because I do plan on reading that soon.
It is a strange thing to think that the end of the Empire of the Wolf, and all the death and devastation that came with it, traced its long roots back to the tiny and insignificant village of Rill. That as we drew closer to it, we were not just plodding through a rainy, cold country 20 miles east of the Tolsberg Marches. We were approaching the precipice of the Great Decline, its steep and treacherous slope falling away from us like a cliff face of glassy obsidian.
This is Book 1 of the Empire of the Wolf series, with Book 2, The Tyranny of Faith, coming out in a few months, I think. This is a scrumptious high fantasy about a king's justice who has to put his epic detective skills, with a capital Z, to good use to solve a murder and unravel an empire-threatening conspiracy. This book was enthralling from beginning to end, and man do I love me some intrigue. The villains of this story are infuriating yet compelling at the same time. In my opinion, what makes for a great cast of characters is something that is besides the whole black and white morality. In other words, much like how the most believable heroes are a lot more than just the good guy and have doubts about their goals and are fallible also, what makes a great villain and an infuriating one is if they believe they are doing the right thing, even if it turns out to be the complete opposite. Now, on the topic of the good guys, this book is entirely from the perspective of one Helena Sedanka, who is the clerk of the King's Justice that I mentioned earlier, Sir Conrad von Valt. Of course, being significantly younger than von Valt, she's not perfect and gets into her fair share of trouble. Then again, so does von Valt, but I did enjoy reading from her perspective. I am curious as to whether Book 2 will also be in Helena's perspective, but besides that, if you're looking for a book with equally good characters and plot, you've come to the right place. Alrighty, that's almost all of the books I've wanted to talk about. Last, but certainly not least, is...
I like to think we were close. We had shared in our griefs. I had told him about my father's sickness, and he had told me about the accident. Yet there was still so much I didn't know. So many things I wanted to ask him. Such as, why do you cry out at night, Yakov? Were you having a nightmare? It's okay. You can tell me. I won't tell anyone. I'll never tell.
Delicious. Finally, some good food. This is a historical mystery novel set during the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, and follows the main character Alter, who is trying to save up enough money to bring his mother and sisters over from Romania. That kind of gets turned on its head when his best friend Yakov becomes the latest victim in a string of murders, and Alter himself is possessed by Yakov's Dybbuk, forcing him to team up with a familiar face from his past and find the killer before it's too late. Now, I have heard a couple of things about the Dybbukim, those being disembodied spirits from Jewish folklore that wander around seeking human hosts until their goals have been accomplished, though I have also heard that they wander as a result of their former sins. In Yakov's case, he was directly acquainted with the killer, but that's all I can say without dropping major spoilers. That being said, The City Beautiful does drift into dark and intense territory at times, but I'm still glad I read it. I was hooked from the first sentence, and there are currently a number of moments currently living in my head rent-free. There's this rich atmosphere with an enjoyable cast of characters, except for the main villains, they can go touch grass. I was also excited to hear that this book is getting a sequel/spin-off from the perspective of the other main character, Frankie. So there's some good news on that front, at least. Hey, wait a second. This means Alter and Frankie might be in danger again. Dang it! So those were my favorite reads in 2022. If you made it to the end of this video and you want to see more, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Next week, I'm going to cover my most anticipated releases for 2023, so if you want to see that, stay tuned, because this New Year's special isn't over just yet. Thanks for watching! La la la, sparkling cider time. It looks like a fish out of the toilet, but at least it tastes delicious.